Okay, so our next keynote speaker is Fareen Zaver. She's our one of our core exec members. She's our chief people officer. In that role, she helps lead the Digital Scholars Program. She's also a clinical assistant professor at the University of Calgary. So I'll turn it over to Fareen, and she'll just be speaking about the Digital Scholars Program.
So I think a few people have already sort of talked a little bit about it. And it sort of speaks to some of the amazing people on the leadership team at CanadiEM. It's not to say that the Digital Scholars Fellowship forces you to stay on with CanadiEM and sort of, it's not our secret recruitment maneuver, but it sort of has worked out that way, which has been amazing. So you'll sort of see as I go through the list of the people who graduated from the fellowship, so many of them are on this call. They've stayed really engaged with CanadiEM and just in general with moving forward with digital scholarship, which is really the whole point of the fellowship. So if you're thinking about, who should be applying, the idea is in the past, it's been those in the Royal College program who are in their R4 or sort of their special interest time. That's obviously going to be changing as we're moving into more CBD, but the program is really quite flexible. So I think Dan mentioned that it is generally a one-year fellowship, but we do have the ability to sort of have you start or stop at different points. As long as the deliverables of the fellowship are completed within a reasonable time frame, you can sort of work this around if you are doing your Royal College and you're in the CBD cohort and you don't have this fourth year interest time, and you're trying to figure out how do I sort of put some of this interest time together, et cetera. And then it's also for, of course, for those in the +1 program, we've had a few that have actually graduated from the program and then have moved into, they've graduated from their residency program and are doing it as staff, they're doing it as residents, it's sort of across the board. So that's sort of who can apply. In terms of what the objectives are, the idea is we're trying to develop people who are interested in producing digital education. So a lot of you that are already putting together blog posts or infographics or things like that. But the idea is to try to apply not medication, but medical education theory, sort of in this online format. So the people who are, there's a lot of people who are on the executive and sort of part of the mentorship of this fellowship that have done a lot of med ed training and have a lot of med ed background. So the idea is to take that medical education theory and meld it with digital innovation. And then we also sort of help you figure out what and how to build a really strong digital identity. And there's a huge network across not just even North America, but just across the world of people that all of us sort of know and are connected to. So the idea of the fellowship is that you also then have access to that mentorship, those educators. And so you can potentially link up with those depending on what your areas of interest are. So there are 5 modules that are available. You do not have to do all of the 5 modules. A couple of samples of what the modules look like are up on the CanadiEM website under the advertisement of the Digital Fellowship. And so these are the 5 areas. So typically you pick between 3 to 4 of these to complete. And there's reading associated with it. There's reflection associated with each of these. But the purpose of this is to sort of understand, based on medical education, literature, et cetera, how do you put together a good blog or a good podcast? And we connect you to people who are experts on all of these things to sort of help you develop and build this portfolio together. So the application is quite simple. So we have had, this past year, we had 3 fellows. Patrick was our most recent graduate, but we have space for one sort of starting in the fall. It's not really like a set timing of when you'd need to start. It really depends on where you're at in your training, what makes sense for you timing wise. So like I mentioned earlier, we are pretty flexible, but obviously a letter of interest. The idea is that there should be a deliverable. There's some sort of project, there's something that you're really looking to do in the digital world that this fellowship will help you to build and create. So each of the fellows have had sort of a different area of interest, a different project that they're trying to create or put together. And what we did with the fellowship is they went through those modules. They then, using the information from the modules, were able to then strengthen their project. They had mentorship on the project and sort of worked on that, both in their own time as well as with whatever support they required or needed from the people who are involved in the fellowship. And then, of course, if you are still in residency, you do need a letter of endorsement from your program director as well. And then the last thing that's sort of required is if you're in residency still, you do need a local mentor. So it doesn't have to be someone who's an expert in digital education. That's our job to do. But the concept would be that you have someone that you can use to help with your day-to-day and your rotations and all the other stuff that you're sort of expected to do in residency. And they pair with us to sort of make sure that you're continuing to move along your fellowship. As I mentioned, we've had a ton of previous fellows, but 3 of the fellows are actually on our call today. And so obviously you can see some of the caliber of the great people who are out there. All 3 of them have sort of also been very helpful to sort of help support new fellows on onboarding. They've been able to share a lot of what they've done in the past to sort of help not have to reinvent the wheel. So again, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to either reach out to our CanadiEM email or directly to myself. I'm happy to share 1 or 2 of the modules so you get an idea of what the modules look like. If you're sort of thinking, this is tweaking my interest, but I'm not sure I have a project, we can work on that as well. So just sort of feel free to reach out to us with any of those questions.